I've added one more color mixture to my palette, the one that is listed as the 7th mix. And this is actually just a cool white. It's going to be the basis for a lot of the colors that go into the reflection of the landscape in the mirror. I'm beginning the reflection in this mirror by painting the castle walls, and I'm starting with that lightest mix that's a cool white, listed as your number 7 mix. As I move across this wall area, I'll vary that color slightly by adding some of the flesh mixes to it, which will tend to warm it up. So the lightest value on the walls of this castle is your number 7 mix, which is actually a cool violet white. The shadow sides are made from mixtures of the darker flesh tone colors, your 6 and 7 mix, that'll give you cool violet grays, and this entire structure will appear to be way in the background. I'm still using that same white bristle filbert brush to lay this paint on, and I'm not using any medium with it. It's going on just as fresh, undiluted paint. I am using a dry brush stroke in order to take advantage of some of the color that's laid down in the underpainting, a great deal of which is already the right color value and temperature. Like the area on this keep, the shadow side is the right value and temperature. The only reason I would lay any color into it at all would be to add a textural context so that it wouldn't have a completely different textural or tactile quality to it compared to the light side of this form. I'm going to let the underpainting do a lot of the work in this whole area in the background. You'll notice that the dark values that I'm putting in the areas of the castle are not exceedingly dark. That's because I want them to stay in the background. Being a landscape, we have to get a feeling of recession in space, or the fact that some areas are farther away and some areas are closer to us. So that's done by a control of the value range, which you'll see as the landscape progresses toward us, the value of the structures gets successively darker, such as this bridge shape is darker overall than the castle, even though the castle is made out of the same kind of construction material. Granted, we're on the shadow side of this castle, but even when I add the light values, you're going to see that the darker values dominate in the shadow areas and pull that bridge structure closer to us. For instance, the dark side of the bridge is darker overall than the shadow side of the keep or the turrets of the castle beyond. If you compare the dark values, you'll see that the bridge shadowed areas are much darker than the castle shadowed areas. Even those dark values up under the arches of the bridge are darker than the openings, the arched openings in the castle entrance and the keep entrance. All of those things are subtle, but they're what bring the eye forward. And whether you've realized it or not, if you paint this along with me or by yourself, at some point you'll realize there's an entire painting just in the reflection in the mirror. The grass is painted with mixtures that are based on your flesh tones. A simple mix of the dark values of phthalo green and transparent oxide red will give you the darks that go into the base of the trees, but all of the values that are laid onto the ground are lightened with flesh mixes. Of course, we add some cad yellow light or Indian yellow to them to give a little more intensity to the yellow, but the lightening agent, it comes straight out of the flesh tones. Now the sky is a light blue that's based on the number 7 mix, that cool white, but the only place that the cool white is used by itself is after the sky is laid in with a fairly blue color, then the lighter value comes back on top of it. You'll notice that there's a progression in value from the left side to the right side of the horizon, from a slightly darker, more intense blue to a lighter blue. This helps give the illusion of space, even though it's a very subtle thing. The rooftops are highlighted on the edges on the left-hand sides facing the light, and their darks are accented on the right-hand side to give a little more interest back there, a little melody running right across the top of that shape of the castle. Don't have to be too very specific about the shapes back there. The color is indication enough that these are red tiled roofs. And a few highlighted touches there on the wall close to the girl will bring your eye back into the center of interest rather than lingering back in the landscape in the mirror. The water's painted with the colors right out of the sky, and when you come into the foreground, you'll add more of the blues to indicate deeper, richer color in the water. The water would reflect a sky that's outside our view, and it would be much darker in value. So darken that water as it comes toward the foreground, darker than the sky. As we step closer into the foreground, we're now actually inside the tower with the Lady of Shalott. And we're painting one of the columns that frames the window opening that she's looking through. This is much darker than anything behind, and that serves to bring it closer to us. It's not as dark as it could ultimately go, because the darkest thing is this upright of the reflection of the loom. That gives us another layer and brings us closer still to the foreground. So these three, actually 4 planes of value is what gives us the recession in space in this very shallow field of the tower room that the lady sits in. You'll see me changing from the white bristle filbert brushes to flat sable brushes. The sables can give me a sharp chisel edge when I really need to get a fine edge, and I would have a sharper edge on this loom support because it's closer to me. The columns that support that arched opening are farther away and would have less hard edges. And of course the bridge and the castle beyond would have the least hard edges. The fabric that's being woven in the loom is painted with mixtures that come right out of your flesh tones. I'm going to refer you to your printed instructions and diagrams to see exactly what colors are there, but you'll notice that practically every middle tone value in this painting is based on your flesh mixtures. So it would have been a good idea to have mixed a generous amount of those in the beginning. And if it takes you several days to paint this painting, as I'm sure it will, you might consider the next time you mix the paint to mix a more generous quantity, because the flesh mixes are the reservoir of colors that everything comes from. It's also what helps hold the color scheme together, so that those things in the background aren't completely separate as a part of the painting that doesn't belong to everything that's in the foreground. It would be very easy to make that landscape in the background feel like it had no relationship at all to what's in the foreground if you didn't repeat those colors. The medallion on the fabric in the loom, the tapestry in the loom, is painted very abstractly. It'll look better if you just put down blocks of color, bright color. Remember, this medallion is reflecting the one that's on the nearer side of the tapestry. When you're looking at the full image of the painting, it's not reflecting the one that's closest to the mirror. The medallion need not be finished at this stage, but just placed on the tapestry. You can finish it when you're finishing the tapestry on the real loom that's in front of it. And then if you need to make adjustments so that it'll appear to be the proper reflection, that would be the time to do it. This is a reflection of the wall that is on the viewer's side of this room. And it's quite dark because it's receiving no light except what's reflected from the mirror that you're now painting. So actually it's the same type of wall as that the mirror's hanging on, but to keep it from disappearing entirely into that wall, if you'll leave a slight value difference, then there'll be no confusion as to whether this is a hole in the wall or a mirror. I've made a progression all the way from the background to the very foreground in this reflected landscape. Now I'm going back to this middle area and refining some of the shapes so that they're more understandable. And I find this is a good way to work throughout the painting. That is, get your basic shapes in first and go back for detail later. If you remember how we painted the face, we painted in all of the basic shapes first before we decorated the face with the detailing of the features. This little landscape within the overall painting I'm treating exactly the same way. For the most part, you're going to find that all of the lighter values used on the wooden part of the loom come right out of your flesh mixes. And if you will always reach for your flesh mixes, then you'll always pick up a color that's compatible with the rest of the colors used in the painting. As a final note on this mirror, I'm adding a scumbling glaze with some of the colors used up in the pillars, the supports of or the columns supporting those arched openings. And I'm dragging it across to give the feeling that there's a sheen on the mirror, that it actually has a glassy surface. This can be accomplished by breaking the edges of those hard crisp lines there at the edge of the wall and coming right across into the loom, as if the sheen of the mirror has no relationship to the subject within the mirror, which is actually true. We'll indicate this mirror-like quality also by adding the bevel right along the edge that gives us a change in value as it crosses right through the loom and the tapestry. There will be a distortion of the colors in places where you wouldn't expect to see a dark, you'll see a dark. Where you expect to see a light, you'll see a dark, and so on. So that little bevel that distorts the image on the other side makes us know that this is in fact a mirror and not a circular opening in the wall.